So after creation of our repositories and extension methods, now we are going to create our services. First of all, we will create our customer service folder in which we will have our customer service class and customer service interface. Now in this folder, first I'm going to create our customer service interface and I'm going to prefix it with I. In this interface, we will declare only functions and then implement it in its class. Now let's create our customer service class in which we will implement its interface. Now in service interface, we have to implement all our repository functions. Let's copy it. But there will be one difference in customer service functions and customer repository functions, and the difference is their return type. In services we are going to return DTO types, but in a repository we were returning entity types. Also in interface we have a generic return type, that is response DTO. Now we need to replace our entities with DTOs and then return it in response DTO. Entity status will be same. Now in place of tuple we will have page data here, and here with response data we will pass page data. Now in this page data class we need to define its type, so we are having here customer DTO type of page data. So guys, these are our 4 functions which we have implemented in our repository. Now we are extending it in service just to implement our business logic here. Now what we need to do, we need to implement these all functions in its service class. In this customer service class, we want to implement dependency inversion, and for that purpose we are going to define constructor first. Now we will create private read-only object of this iCustomer repository. Instead of constant we are using read-only here, just because we can initialize read-only object in constructor instead like constant object that must be initialized right after the declaration. Now as we are implementing dependency inversion here, so that's why we are creating object of iCustomer repository instead of its class. Next, let's implement all the functions of iCustomer service. First, let's implement delete by ID function. Now let's create response object and implement our logic in try catch. Now first of all, let's implement our error case. In case of error, we will send response status.error with exception.message. And then just return response. Now in try block, let's implement our logic. Now in result of response, we are going to save our delete by ID response which is coming from our customer repository. As is async method, so we need to write await here. In the same way, we need to implement the logic for all the functions. So all the error handling we are dealing here in services. Now in case of filter function, we are calling same function from repository and passing the parameter filter sort column etc here. Now, first of all, we need to get customer list tuple dot item1 dot to DTO list. Now we are using two DTO lists which we already created in our extension folder just to convert our entity type to DTOs, which we are going to display on front end. Next, we need to initialize our pagination object. So this is our filter function. Next functions are most probably like delete by ID functions. Let's just see them. But the only different thing is if we want to display data on front end, then we need to convert our entity type to DTO types. But if we want to save our data, then we need to convert our DTO types to entity type. For that purpose, we already created our extension functions to DTO, to entity, or to DTO list or to entity list in our extension lecture. If these conversions are confusing you, then I guess you need to see this lecture which I have mentioned in description and on the screen too. So this is it for services. Hope you understand this entire lecture. If you have any question, then you can ask in comments. After the creation of our repositories and services, now first of all we need to create our objects by dependency injections. Now by services we need to inject our DB context builder.services. Now we just provide our DB context here, customer DB context. In option, we are providing a provider which we are going to use. We are going to use SQL Server, which I mentioned here. In its parameter, I am going to pass connection strings name. Next, we need to add repository. For repository, we will use add scope, which will define that our per HTTP request will create only one object. For dependency inversion, we have three kind of scopes. One is singleton. Singleton will create one object for our entire application, and scope will create one object per one HTTP request. But add transient will create object every time. Now we are using add scope for our repositories object and for our services object. First I'm adding scope for iCustomer repository and customer repository. And same we will create for our service. Now we have created objects of these three DB context, repository and services by dependency injection. Next we need to create our customers controller. Here we are using controller base. Now let's define route first. Now let's use another decorator which is API controller. Now again we will use the same function we created in service and repository. Now what will be the basic function of controller is it will works as a bridge between front end and back end. If we want to save data in our database, then this controller will receive data from front end and pass it to the service. Otherwise, if we want to display something, then our controller will get data from service and display it on the front end. Let's copy paste all the function we have created in our service. Our controller functions will be public, and on every function we will define method access, like how we access our method, such as get, post, put, delete. Now here for get by ID, I'm going to write http get. But before that, we need to inject our service by dependency injection. Now by this object we will implement all the methods, as we have already written our business logic in our services. So now this controller only returning service values. For save function we will use http post, and for delete we will call http delete. For filter again we will use http get. Now we need to define the route. Now we can simply define route on the controller only, but also we can define route separately on each function also. Now let's see it. If we don't define routes on the methods, then we can also get these functions by these HTTP requests like get, post, delete. Then it will be a RESTful API. Now as we are defining a route for each method, so it's a REST API but not RESTful API. So now we have completed our backend. Now in next lecture we will see our front end. But still, if you have any question, any confusion in our backend series, you can ask in comments.